Okay, welcome to another It's Not About Me podcast. My name is Greg Laurie, aka Social Greg with Monks Media Works, and with my co host.
I'm Trip Braden with Empowering Serving Leaders at tripbraden.com.
Hey, hey, happy Mother's Day. Huh?
Happy Mother's Day.
Yeah, well, most of you will be listening to this podcast after Mother's Day, but I'm sure we'd like to wish you a happy Mother's Day, and I hope you had a great Mother's Day as well. This show is going to be a little bit part two on partnerships, and so we want to kind of check in with you guys. We had some questions from the audience, but also, you know, we looked at mission, vision, and values the last time and how it syncs with the partners. And then this week we kind of wanted to touch a little bit about social enterprise and social entrepreneurship. So, social enterprise is more defined as a business that really has social objectives that serves its primary purpose. So it could be, most of us think of nonprofits, but it could be a for-profit uh, solopreneurship, startup, or even a big corporation. Then social entrepreneurship, I just wanted to briefly kind of go over that with you guys, is that it's about, a person who develops and funds, implements solutions to social, cultural, or environmental issues, and that's how we're looking at this. But also, there's corporations out there that also has missions in that area, as we're going to talk about here. So the question is, how do we pick partners? And I think that's one of the things that we're trying to answer with this part two. And what I want to tee it up for Trip here is one of the questions we got in from some people who are curious about partnerships. Does the partnership create value for all stakeholders involved? And maybe you want to talk about that, Trip.
Sure. Thanks, Greg. I think one of the things we're talking about here is when we're talking about social entrepreneurship is we're talking about a new way of looking at life, right? I mean, looking at our organizations and providing value to our communities. So part of that is changing as we speak. Obviously, we have a very stressful situation right now. But I think part of it is also understanding that this is another relationship. A lot of organizations, when they come into these kinds of things, they're looking for one thing and what they're looking for they won't find because they haven't defined it clearly. So a large portion of what I try to get my clients to do is to kind of create that collaborative mission, vision, values that's shared. So you actually have an ability to say, okay, how are we socially impacting society? And how do each of us bring a value to that? So part of that is helping each other share what those things are and really to embrace those differences, not see them as being bad. Not one is right, one is wrong, but more how combined can we create a better social enterprise. So when you look at what you're seeing out there, you guys are a little bit ahead of the curve on some of these kinds of things because you have a lot of early stage social entrepreneurs. My social entrepreneurs average 100 years old, right? So when you have that, there's a little bit different culture. What are you seeing going out there, Greg?
I think when you talk about value for stakeholders, it's interesting, and there's a couple companies, and we'll talk about this maybe in a separate podcast about companies that actually private equity firms that actually invest in social entrepreneurs, but also so basically the private equity firm would be just like any other equity firm. There's taking yours or my social wealth or a wealth and reinvesting it into different enterprises. But if you look at some of these people that are out here doing that, they're investing in big corporations, and then that's what we're going to kind of talk about today. It isn't just startups or nonprofits; it's actually big corporations that these guys will be investing in. But I think in general that when I worked in several nonprofits, the partnership thing was very difficult. I'll be honest with you. I think that's why we're talking about this. None of them had the mindset. I came from a corporate background as well as you, right? So coming into a nonprofit, our view of things are a lot different. But if you talk about people who've been in this nonprofit for a very long time, they look at it another lens as well. And so it was always difficult to try to figure out how to merge both lenses together to see in a common direction a lot of times. I mean, does that make sense?
Sure. I think what you're talking about is really that a lot of organizations have different value systems that are inborn. I mean, if it's like people in nonprofits believe the people who make money are evil, right? I mean, and vice versa. People in corporations think nonprofits don't work. So, I mean, obviously, if you start with those two cultural icons in each other's minds to start in a relationship, you're going to have a problem because there's no middle ground there, right? So, part of what I see us having to do is having this ability to really look at each other in a new way, because I think COVID-19 is going to change how we do a lot of these kinds of things, right? So there's a nice facilitator there and an accelerator for growth and an opportunity. But you still have to sit there and say to yourself, what are our value creation activities that we're doing? What are we bringing to our communities, right? And if each organization says, here's what I think I bring here, and I'm looking to look at it from the point of view of what we bring, not who we are, we have a different quality of organization that we're building together. The other component here, I think, a lot of times is nonprofits are great places for people to learn, you know, and that's the other advantage that you think about. A lot of these organizations who have social missions, one of their missions is to train people and develop their next generation of serving leaders. So when you look at what we're doing in society today, we've got to have a conversation that talks about what we can help people with. And a nonprofit needs a different kind of person today than they might have needed 10 years ago. So when I say that, what do you think? Because you're seeing, you have a different perspective on the younger people than I might, because I have a Midwest value system. Many of my students were very young, 20, 25 years old, come from a socioeconomic structure that says, look, we work in a manufacturing company, we work in a distribution company. That's our career, and that's what we do. But you're out where there's really a lot of hot stuff going on, and a lot of people come out to where you are. Used to go out to Hollywood for being an actor. Now you go out to be a social entrepreneur in San Francisco. So what are you seeing going out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I think when it comes to thinking differently, I think that's where these private equity firms actually could be of importance, or people like your or my background could be important in these nonprofits, because we think more from a business standpoint. You know, that could be looked at, like you said earlier, nonprofit could look at that as kind of against what they're trying to do, but it really is, I feel, very, very cohesive to what they want to do, especially if they want to, as we talked about, bring in partnerships that have long-term value for them, right? And long-term, just it isn't just for this campaign, but what can we do together long-term to solve a problem, like you're saying, whether it's hunger or water or whatever. I think that's kind of how I see what's going on here. I mean, just like at Ohio State in your area, Stanford has a social entrepreneurship program, and as well as Berkeley and a couple other places, and it's just a lot of the people are coming out here are trying to think about solving social issues, and the younger people I see are more connected to social issues. They want to solve something, as opposed to, and yeah, they want to build something great. I'm not going to lie about that. And they want to do it for a profit. So there's a lot of these enterprises out here are for-profit enterprise, but solving social issues. Like plastic in the ocean is a good example. A lot of that, trying to solve that specific thing of environmentally. How do we lower the plastic content in the ocean? So I mean, those are examples of what I see. I think you bring up a very good point about, again, the synergy aspect, and really trying to understand that. And but I wanted to ask you also. There's another question that someone had asked us in as we're starting to launch this is. Communication between the partners, whether it's a corporate to nonprofit with another nonprofit, what's your perspective on the way to really communicate well between each other to maintain this long-term relationship?
Well, I think it's kind of about relationship, right? This is the other component of this. Many nonprofits for many, many years have been zero relationships. So we have a certain event, we have a certain fundraising goal, we have a certain thing we're trying to do, and it's like a series, right? So you come back every year and you talk to me about what you need this year because you've got a program you've done for 20 plus years. Now with this COVID-19 and the fact that we're not going to be able to be assembled in the same ways we used to be, we're going to have to get more creative in how we put together our partnerships. And part of that's collaboration skills. And part of it's using, and you see it with you and I. using collaboration platforms so that we're working in two different parts of the country. We can have a good conversation. We can share what's going on back and forth through a collaboration platform. The second is that we have to be willing to talk about the difficult things that maybe in the past have been left unsaid, and they didn't fester because we weren't in a difficult situation. When you start to move into more chronically challenging times for nonprofits, which is going to happen because you look at the people who funded a lot of these organizations for many years, not so much the big donors. The big donors are still going to have the money to give. They've really been impacted, but not the way the mid-market has, for example. And the mid-market in many places supports a lot of the lesser known nonprofit, the one that has a specialty cause that they want to do. And the reason they work together is because autism, for example, a local autism group, where the CEO has an autistic child, has got to know the organization, has wanted to get more involved, and has brought along with him a chain of people who understood the conditions of being a parent of an autistic child, right? So I think part of this is how do you have serial conversations move into a collaborative conversation, right? And ultimately, how do we create that synergy where we can talk the way we do and not be penalized for what we say? If you say to someone, look, I have a little extra money in my fund right now, you don't want the person to say, I'm not going to give then. I'll wait to give. Yeah. But, and on the other hand, if someone says, look, we know that we've got a good quarter coming on, this is what our plan would be to distribute funds for you guys. These are kind of conversations that have to have back and forth. And I think part of it's understanding each other's environment they're working in, right? I mean, one of the things we bring, because it's like I kid about it, but every business owner I've ever talked to about raising money for nonprofits and saying, "Look, I'd like you to give us some money," they say as soon as they start acting like a business, we'll start giving them money. Well, part of the natural thing about this is if you look at the 12 million people that work in nonprofits in this country, about half of that probably works in the front lines with people that are in poverty. So to ask them to work like a corporation is probably not the most effective way of getting what you want from them. So, and it's also assuming that they're wrong and you're right. So part of this is how do we build that conversation up, and where do we go from there? Because when I think of ongoing communications, I think that means talking more than 6 times a year. When I've been involved, I have a weekly communication schedule, and I actually put it up on the schedule right from the start. And if both partners can't be involved in it, that tells you what their commitment to the partnership is, which might be a good question. What do you see working with nonprofits when it comes to collaborating, and are they using technology to enable things that should be done versus, doing it the way we've always done it?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I looked at, worked at, and I deal with a lot of nonprofits, they're it's a mixed bag. I think if there's a lot of younger people, they'll try to adopt technology. Like for the Cherry Blossom Festival, we use Slack as a communication tool. Now, there's a digital divide. A lot of the older people who's been there for about X amount of years just are not tech savvy. So obviously, we can't implement a policy that's across the board that you have to use Slack. So we just kind of mixed both younger and newer people. So we kind of commute a different way with the older people and another way with the younger people through Slack. So, because then it gives you push notifications on your mobile. You can do it at your bus stop, whatever, and answer a question. You don't have to flood email. There's a lot of tools like that kind of lower the burden of communication off of email and increase productivity by putting it on the mobile. So, but I think it's difficult. Going back to what you were saying earlier about conversations with corporate donors and stuff like that, I found the best great conversations where you could just be honest, like across the table with another, say, hey, I think I had a donor this year say to me, hey, Greg, we're actually going to have a good year. Why don't you ask for a little bit more? I think probably is doable. That kind of honesty you were saying, and I reminded you of what you were saying, reminded me of that conversation I had. But there's others where I don't have that relationship, and it isn't across, it isn't equal across the board, right? There's some relationships that are very difficult, like with Japanese companies we deal with for the Cherry Blossom Festival. We have very awkward conversations unless we got to know them over 3 or 4 years. But the problem is that a lot of these people are expats, and then after 2 years, they're switching over, and the new guy comes in. So, you know, but recognizing that is part of the game too. That's kind of like that's what I was kind of when I think about partnerships, that's where I see those two examples as kind of opposites and trying to develop, but you have to try to develop both. I wanted to ask you. There was a question about the partnership adds value if they're continuing learning from each other. I assume, right? Can you talk a little bit about that and what you were talking about that?
Sure, I think continuous learning is really a critical element in a great partnership, because what you're having is a conversation on a regular basis. But the continuous learning is also, for example, you talk about how do you use Slack, and all you'd have to do is, now this year would be very difficult, but typically you could have put together for your volunteers a Slack training video, potentially have somebody talk about what you're doing and how to do it, maybe even assign a mentor that's junior to somebody who's older and say, look, let me tag team you up with this team. Obviously right now we're kind of trying to run like special forces, right? Everywhere, anywhere we need to be, we're doing, right? But ultimately what you want to do is you want to start to align these things so you have a team base that's built on the idea of learning from each other and mentoring. Ideally, if you say to somebody who's in a corporation, I'm going to help train and develop your next generation of leadership, teaching them how to influence people versus being the old style of authority leadership, and you put some programs and training into place to help the volunteers go through those kinds of programs, even maybe create a certification for that you get from being a volunteer. You're certified in this level. Now, when I pick my team, I know who I've got on my team, what their training might be. And you can do a lot of that on a virtual platform. I mean, this is one of the other parts of it where the technology pieces really start to play a nice role, because up on YouTube, you can watch a quick video, and if you forget, you can go watch it again for more senior people like me. So part of it is to understand how that stuff works. And part of it's also understanding we're talking about a team concept. And team concept is a much different thing than what we've had in the past with most successful nonprofits. You always had a very dynamic leader. You oftentimes would have several people around that leader, and then the quality falls off after that, right? And equality doesn't mean I'm trying to be insulting to other people in the organization. It's just they don't have other skills that are critical skills. But part of what we can provide as a nonprofit is those critical skills. And if you look at, I always think of McDonald's, would you call it a social organization or not? Well, when you start to realize how many people they put into the workforce that have become managers and frontline supervisors, you realize that their purpose is not just to sell burgers. It's really to create an environment that's very conducive to creating the next generation of leadership. I mean, that's a huge part of what I'm seeing going on right now is the lack of leadership on the front lines. We always talk about leadership. Well, you need to know how to manage things too. And that's where I think nonprofits can provide a lot of P&L. My first P&L was in a nonprofit. And, it's very tight and it was very close. And I learned how to run a P&L sheet. Well, it changed my life. So we can teach people how to do that.
Yeah.
So
No, it's good. The other thing another question that kind of came up, which is, making sure the partnership is a success. And, what do you see as the elements of a successful partnership, so that people could kind of learn from this podcast here?
Sure. Well, I actually think that you have to have a proper partnership has to have certain elements in it. I actually like to see the common shared values and mission of the group that's doing this kind of work. So I'm going to go through some maybe a little extra foundational work with people to better understand what we're trying to accomplish, so everybody on the team is clear about what they're doing, right? So when you go beyond that, you say, okay, how do you manage this nonprofit? One of the things that's kind of, I think, lacking, we're in a time where leadership is everybody's nirvana, right? I mean, everybody wants to be the leader. No one wants to be a follower, and no one wants to be the manager. And you have people who are out there telling people you don't need management skills to be good in nonprofits. Well, when you have small budgets and tight budgets, it comes down to your management skills and capabilities. So I think one of the critical elements also is teaching them, 101 business skills. How they manage their nonprofit is how do we manage how we bring people in? Something as simple as recruiting. How do you recruit volunteers? I mean, most nonprofits run on their volunteers, not on their executive team. So how do we help bring and attract those kinds of people? So that's a fundamental thing. If I have a partnership I want to start, I want to find the people in my organization right now. I want to know who they are that want to be involved in this. I mean, as simple as having a simple. I used to have 4x6 cards in some of my nonprofits. I had 1,000 4x6 cards, and they were categorized. And I'd pull out from them. I need someone in accounting. Here's a volunteer who has an accounting background. So part of that is understanding how do we get those kinds of issues to work together, and we think about it as an organizational issue, not a nonprofit or a for-profit issue. It's about the culture you're creating. I mean, that's the other component that we talked an awful lot about. It. It's like the elephant in the room. What's the elephant in the back of the room? It's probably culture for the partnership. What are our shared values? What do we want to accomplish? Who are we? What kind of people do we work well with? I think of I have a couple of clients that are big, like big four accounting firms, and they struggle when they try to do nonprofit work because those people are very high charging and quick to get things done. And hey, if I call you tomorrow at 9 a.m., I want to call back by 9:26. And nonprofits like I got 14 guys like you waiting for my call. How do you set up a communications platform? And that's another part of what we're talking about, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right about volunteers. I think that's what runs a lot of these nonprofits, and really trying to make a great experience for volunteers, trying to get them to to understand the whole system. I think one of the good ones out here that I like is the Bicycle Coalition. San Francisco is really trying to make a more bike friendly city, and so the Bicycle Coalition has these great mentorship type of things, just like you were talking about, where they have a train the trainer aspect to it, and then the trainer who's a volunteer will train other volunteers. But there's a formula to it all, and I like what they're doing as far as even getting them to come and do volunteer activities once a month. Like they send out postcards. Come in and stamp 100 postcards for us tonight. That type of thing, and they tend to make it very social. Bring pizzas, beer in, wine, whatever, and just kind of make it a social activity as well. So, it goes back to what you're saying is finding the right people and trying to create the community. But I think one of the aspects is really how do you communicate value back to the corporation? Let's say you're a nonprofit and a corporation is invested heavily into you. How do you create that value with them in terms of communication and everything? That's an interesting thing, right? Making sure that is successful somehow, and finding the right person to communicate with the corporation or whatever the partner.
Well, I think part of what you're talking about, though, Greg, is you're talking about communication, but the other part, I think, is you're talking connection and engagement, right? So we're looking at this and saying, how do we get people to do this? Part of the way of changing the dynamic, from my perspective, is what we can change, right? I can't change you or this other person. I can change my own behavior. So if I'm in a nonprofit, maybe I do a little bit more homework on the front end of what I do to find out more about what your corporation really is about and what they value. Look at where they've donated other money in the past, where they're volunteers, even looking inside my own organization, see who might be from the organization I'm looking to talk to, just to get a better culture check before I give them that call and start talking about what's going on. A lot of times we can get research and we have a lot of access to a lot of things, but people don't think about doing it till after they start engaging. And really, if you set the foundation piece in, that you're going to learn a little bit more about what that organization's about, either direction. It's the same way if you're a corporation looking to get involved. That doesn't typically happen as much, by the way, unless there's a person at the top of the organization who's very philanthropic with what they want to do, or they want to leave a lasting leadership legacy. When you want to do those things, that person, probably your best volunteer and the best person to educate you about the organization, is probably already in your organization and you just haven't realized it yet, because they can bring a lot of other dimensions. Right? We talk about Columbus Zoo, for example, and the match programs, and looking at what they're doing. And you look at saying, the other part, I guess, which just hit me kind of oddly, is it's everybody wants 100 partners, right? And what I found, and when we did the work at the zoo, they had 65 partners when we came in. When we were done, we had 12. And the value creation that we were able to create with 12 partners was significantly better for the corporations who were involved with us. We had teams of people running around in sponsor shirts and trained and understanding and knowing they represented our client partner organizations and activation and talking about it. And it was such a different energy among the volunteers because they were on teams. I mean, so we put some little contests up about, hey, when you do this, or can you get someone to come in and become a yearly member, or can you get someone to, so part of it is really thinking the same way you do with anything you influence, right? Is if I was trying to influence anybody to do anything I wanted in any other situation, I would do my homework. So that's what you can do. I think with this, the other part of this is understanding who's in your organization and their interests.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've seen some nonprofits out here use Salesforce as a way of managing volunteers. I think there's a bunch of volunteer, profile management software that's out there. But those are the tools that you really need, as you pointed out, to try to really understand who's your volunteers and how would they match for certain programs that you're running with different partners, right? So,
Well, the other part is understanding what do we, if all we have is human talent, right, to work with as nonprofits typically, then it's our job to figure out how to help them be as effective as they can be by understanding what they're doing and what their strengths are. I mean, part of this idea is, I'm a strength-based coach. When I work with my clients, nonprofit or profit, I'm sitting here saying, what are your strengths? What do you should be doing? And then there's another part of this, which no one wants to talk about in the nonprofit world, is how do you avoid the corporate partner from hell, you know? So how do we do that, right? I mean, because there are partners out there that are just not good partnering organizations, and they take your resources. I mean, a nonprofit is limited in what they have availability. So part of this is why not invest a little bit more time on the front end to get a better relationship on the back end. And I always tell people it's better to dodge a bullet than take one, right? So if I can avoid it somehow, because I have limited resources, because everyone remembers when it fails. If you have a partnership fail, everyone in the market knows it pretty quickly. It's a small world. It's a smaller community, but it's even a smaller world when you have these kind of bigger organizations involved. So how do we make sure failure is not an option for us, but that also means we're gonna have to say no first before a lot of times. And most nonprofit fundraisers have a hard time saying no.
yeah, no, I agree with you. I think that I think I have an example from the Cherry Blossom Festival where we picked up this big corporate sponsor. It looked really bright and shiny, but we really didn't match our mission and vision with them very well. I mean, they wanted access to Asian Pacific demographic that we had, but other than that, that was only really, they only wanted something, and we couldn't really figure out common ground. And they would have been a great sponsor to kind of nurture for years to come, but it just was a one shot, and we all kind of had different feeling out of it. But so anyway, I think let's wrap up this segment on really partnerships and value creation and stuff like that, which I think we spent 2 shows on now. But our next show is really going to be about a little bit more nuts and bolts about low cost way researching potential partners for your organization, whether regardless if you're on the corporate side and looking for a nonprofit partner, or a nonprofit looking for a corporate partner or sponsorship, whatever, or a social entrepreneur looking for funding. We'll talk about that next time. So yeah, what do you think about that? Good.
Well, that's great. One thing we forgot to do, Greg, we forgot people to sign up here today. Take a look, sign up right down here. We've seen the numbers creeping up. We're looking for more. So make sure you sign up while you're here. And secondarily, leave a comment or a like. Let us know what we're doing is making a difference in what you're trying to accomplish, and let us know how we can help. So 2 things: sign up down below, make sure you're getting it every week when we're going to come out every week. Be the first on their block to know what's going on. But just as importantly, give us a comment or a little feedback so we know what we're doing is having some impact out in the nonprofit community.
Yeah, thank you, Trip. And how can they reach you?
They can reach me at tripbraden.com, which is developing serving leaders. Or the other place they can reach me at is at Twitter, or you can just use my name. It's pretty easy on LinkedIn if you're actively involved in LinkedIn, at Trip Braden. So just look up my name. It's pretty easy to find me.
Yeah,
Thanks,
and
Greg. What
no,
about
you're
you?
welcome. You could find me on Twitter at socialgreg, or you could just look up my website, monksmedia.works, and you could just hit the info button there and contact me there, or through LinkedIn as well. So anyway, thanks. Hope everyone had a good Mother's Day, and thank you, Trip, for another insightful and meaningful podcast. So appreciate that, and be careful out there, everyone. See you later.